Arrival at Nexus Station. The transport shuttle shuddered violently as it approached the massive structure floating in the void. Katie Morrison pressed her face against the small porthole, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at Nexus Station. The research facility looked like a metallic spider, its corridors stretching out from the central hub like gleaming legs. Hundreds of windows flickered with bright lights, each one representing laboratories where the galaxy's most brilliant minds studied its most dangerous secrets. This would be her home for the next 2 years. Katie grabbed her single duffel bag as the docking clamps engaged with a resounding clang. The airlock doors hissed open, and she stepped into a world that defied everything she thought she knew about space stations. The corridor walls were covered in strange symbols that pulsed with soft blue light, and the air carried an unfamiliar scent, like ozone mixed with something sweet and metallic that made her nose tingle. "So, you are the new human." The voice came from behind her, musical and precise. Katie turned to see Commander Velter approaching, and her training kicked in as she straightened to attention. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, his gray skin having the texture of polished stone. Four arms moved with fluid precision, and his large black eyes studied her with obvious disappointment. "Lieutenant Katie Morrison, reporting for duty, sir," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. She had practiced this moment during the long journey from Earth, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of standing before an actual alien commander. Velter made a sound that might have been laughter, though it carried no warmth. "Another human sent to study Specimen X7. How refreshing." His tone suggested anything but refreshment. "Tell me, Lieutenant Morrison, how long do you think you will last?" The previous 3 humans requested transfers within their first week. Heat rose in Katie's cheeks, but she kept her chin up. "I plan to complete my full assignment, sir." "We shall see." Velter turned and began walking down the corridor, his 4 arms moving in a rhythmic pattern that reminded Katie of a dancer. "Follow me. I will show you to your quarters and introduce you to what remains of the research team." As they walked, Katie tried not to gawk at the incredible diversity of life around her. A group of insect-like beings with golden, chitinous shells clicked past them, speaking in rapid bursts of sound that hurt her ears. A massive blue creature with tentacles instead of arms was examining a holographic display, its skin shifting through different shades as it worked. Nexus Station houses over 200 researchers from 47 different species, Velter explained without looking back. "We study the most dangerous life forms in this sector of space. It requires intelligence, courage, and experience." The message was clear: Katie possessed none of those qualities, at least not in sufficient measure. They entered a transport tube that moved sideways instead of up and down. Through the transparent walls, Katie caught glimpses of laboratories where impossible experiments were taking place. In one room, scientists in environmental suits worked with what looked like living fire. In another, crystalline beings examined samples that floated freely in mid-air, defying gravity. "Your quarters," Velter announced as they stopped at a door marked with human symbols. The room beyond was small but functional, a bed, desk, and personal facilities. A window looked out at the star field, and Katie felt a moment of homesickness seeing the familiar constellations. "The research laboratory is on level 5, Velter continued. "You will meet your supervisor tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. He leads what is left of the xenobiology team." Katie set down her bag and turned to face the commander. "Sir, could you tell me more about Specimen X7? Velter's 4 arms went completely still. His black eyes seemed to grow even darker. "You will learn what you need to know tomorrow, Lieutenant Morrison. But I will give you one piece of advice." He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Do not let curiosity override common sense. 3 research teams have already paid the ultimate price for underestimating what we keep in containment." After Velter left, Katie unpacked her few belongings and tried to settle in for the night. The bed was harder than anything she was used to, and strange sounds echoed through the walls, conversations in languages that sounded like music, machinery humming with unfamiliar rhythms, and occasionally something that might have been laughter or screaming. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of shadowy creatures with glowing eyes and the distant sound of something calling her name in a voice she had never heard but somehow recognized. Tomorrow, she would meet the creature that had killed more researchers than any other specimen in the station's history. Tonight, she could only wonder if she would be strong enough to survive the encounter. First contact with death. The next morning, Katie found her way to level 5 through corridors that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The research laboratory was 3 times larger than her entire apartment back on Earth, filled with equipment she didn't recognize and holographic displays showing data in symbols from dozens of different languages. Her new supervisor was waiting for her near a massive containment viewing screen. The alien looked like a cross between a spider and an ancient tree, with long, thin limbs that branched into smaller appendages. His bark-like skin was covered in small leaves that rustled softly when he moved. "Ah, the new human," he said, his voice emerging from somewhere deep in his chest and sounding like wind through autumn branches. "I am Research Director Kelvin. I suppose you think you can succeed where others have failed." "I hope to learn from their mistakes," Katie replied carefully. Kelvin made a rustling sound that might have been amusement. Spoken like a true novice. "Very well, let me show you what you are dealing with." He led her to a secure section of the lab where a massive display screen flickered to life, revealing surveillance footage that made Katie's blood run cold. The containment cell was unlike anything she had ever seen, walls made of transparent metal reinforced with energy barriers that created a cage within a cage. And inside that cage was a nightmare. The creature stood 8 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in claws the size of dinner plates. Its body was covered in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 6 arms moved with deadly grace, each ending in hands that could tear through steel like paper. But it was the eyes that made Katie's breath catch in her throat, multiple sensory organs that glowed with purple light, tracking movement with predatory intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. "Specimen X7, Kelvin announced, his leaves rustling with what might have been fear. "Also known as a void stalker. The deadliest predator we have ever encountered. It killed 17 beings during its capture and has been responsible for the deaths of 6 researchers since arriving here." Katie watched the creature pace back and forth in its cage. Every movement spoke of barely contained violence, of a killer waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Yet something about its movements caught her attention. The pacing wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm that reminded her of something she couldn't quite identify. "What do we know about its behavior patterns?" Katie asked. Kelvin's leaves rustled with what might have been surprise. "Behavior patterns? It has one behavior, Lieutenant, it kills everything that comes near it. The previous teams learned that lesson in the most permanent way possible." But Katie continued watching the screen, and the more she observed, the more questions arose in her mind. The creature's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Sometimes it would touch specific spots on the walls at regular intervals. Other times it would sit in what looked like meditation poses. "I'd like to review all the research data," Katie said quietly. "By all means," Kelvin replied, though his tone suggested he doubted she would find anything useful. "Some creatures exist only to destroy, Lieutenant Morrison. Specimen X7 is pure predator, nothing more, nothing less." Katie nodded, but as she watched the creature move through its deadly dance, she found herself wondering if that assessment was really accurate. There was something in those glowing eyes that looked less like mindless hunger and more like intelligence. Ancient, alien intelligence that had been caged and tormented for reasons it might not even understand. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a curiosity that no amount of common sense seemed capable of suppressing. Over the next several days, Katie immersed herself in every file, video, and piece of data about Specimen X7. The reports painted a consistent picture of violence. The creature had killed its captors during transport, attacked every researcher who approached its cage, and destroyed monitoring equipment that got too close. But the more Katie studied, the more inconsistencies she noticed. The attacks weren't random. Each one occurred when researchers tried to use pain inducers or fear tactics, when they shot it with stun weapons or tried to drug its food. In the quiet moments between these encounters, the surveillance footage showed something entirely different. The creature moved in patterns. It made soft sounds that the audio equipment barely picked up. Sometimes it would stand perfectly still for hours, as if listening to something only it could hear. "You're wasting your time," Kelvin told her on the 7th day, his leaves rustling with impatience. 3 teams of experienced researchers have studied this beast. They all reached the same conclusion. What if they were wrong? Katie asked, not looking away from the screen where the creature was performing what looked like a complex ritual involving specific wall touchpoints. Wrong. Kelvin's branches shook violently. Lieutenant Morrison, these were not novices. Dr. Zethary had 40 years of experience with dangerous species. Commander Nexel had captured over 100 predators for study. They knew exactly what they were dealing with. Katie paused the video and pointed at the screen. But look at this. Every time the creature attacks, it happens right after someone tries to hurt it first. What if it's not attacking? What if it's defending itself? The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of machinery. When Kelvin spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Defending itself? Lieutenant, it is a void stalker. They are born killers. They hunt entire species to extinction for sport. Says who? Katie challenged. Where did that information come from? Kelvin went very still, his leaves stopping their perpetual rustling. It is common knowledge. But who studied them first? Who made that determination? Katie turned to face him. Every report I've read just repeats the same claims. No one seems to have actually observed their natural behavior. For a long moment, Kelvin said nothing. When his leaves finally began rustling again, the sound was softer, more uncertain. You are suggesting that centuries of scientific understanding might be wrong? I'm suggesting that maybe we should ask questions instead of making assumptions. The next morning, Katie made a decision that both terrified and excited her. She was going to meet Specimen X7 face to face, not as a researcher with weapons and barriers, but as one intelligent being attempting to communicate with another. It was either the bravest or most foolish decision of her life. Possibly both. The music of understanding. Security Chief Yulvin tried to stop Katie at the containment level entrance. The Ketmore warrior stood nearly as tall as Commander Velter, but where the commander looked like living stone, Yulvin appeared to be forged from steel and battle scars. His reptilian face showed no emotion, but his clawed hand rested meaningfully on the plasma weapon at his side. No one approaches the creature without full protective gear and armed escort, Yulvin said in a voice like grinding metal. Station protocol is absolute. I just want to observe, Katie explained, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'll stay outside the containment barriers. I won't even touch the controls. The last researcher who tried that approach is now dead, Yulvin replied flatly. The creature threw pieces of the cell wall hard enough to crack the outer barrier. His remains required identification through genetic analysis. Katie nodded, having read that particular report multiple times. But that researcher was using sonic torture devices to try to force a response. I'm not planning to hurt it. Yulvin studied her with eyes like yellow glass, unblinking and cold. You are either very brave or very stupid, human. Maybe both, Katie admitted. After what felt like hours of safety briefings and equipment checks, Katie finally stood outside the maximum security containment cell. The creature was even more impressive in person than it had been on the screens, 8 feet of pure predator covered in armor that seemed to drink in the light around it. Its multiple eyes tracked her movement as she approached the outer barrier, and she could feel the weight of its alien intelligence studying her. Katie ignored the fear that made her hands shake and her mouth go dry. Moving slowly and deliberately, she walked to the transparent wall and sat down on the floor, cross-legged like she used to do as a child when her grandmother told stories. The creature stopped pacing and stared at her. For several long minutes, neither of them moved. Katie could hear her own heartbeat, the hum of the energy barriers, the distant sounds of the station's life support systems. Then she did something that no previous researcher had attempted. She closed her eyes and simply listened. The containment cell wasn't silent. Air recyclers hummed steadily, energy barriers buzzed with barely contained power, but underneath those mechanical sounds, Katie could hear something else. The creature was making noise, not the growls or snarls she expected, but something almost musical. A pattern of low notes that rose and fell like a lullaby her mother might have sung. When Katie opened her eyes, the creature was sitting too, not in an attack position but mirroring her posture. Its glowing eyes watched her with what looked more like curiosity than hunger. "Hello," Katie said softly. The creature tilted its massive head. The musical sounds stopped. Katie tried again, this time humming a simple tune, something her grandmother used to sing when Katie was small and couldn't sleep. The melody was gentle, wordless, filled with the kind of comfort that transcended species barriers. The creature went completely still, its multiple eyes focusing on her with new intensity. When she finished the tune, it made its musical sounds again, but this time the pattern was different. It almost sounded like it was trying to copy her melody, translating it into its own alien voice. Katie felt her heart racing, but not from fear. She was right. The creature wasn't just a mindless killer, it was trying to communicate. Over the following days, Katie established a routine that drew concerned looks from the other researchers but which she refused to abandon. Each morning, she would arrive at the containment level and sit outside the barrier. She would hum simple melodies, and the creature would respond with its own musical patterns. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to build a basic form of communication. The creature seemed to understand that she posed no threat. When maintenance crews worked near the cell, it would become agitated, pacing and making harsh warning sounds that set everyone's nerves on edge. But when Katie arrived, it would calm down immediately and return to their musical exchanges. On the 5th day, something extraordinary happened. Katie had been working late in the research lab and arrived at the containment level after her usual time. She found the creature sitting in the same position as always, but it wasn't making its usual sounds. Instead, it was quiet, as if waiting. When Katie sat down and began to hum, the creature responded with what could only be described as joy. Its musical tones soared and danced, creating harmonies that made Katie's eyes fill with tears she didn't understand. "My God," she whispered. "You were waiting for me, weren't you?" The creature's response was a gentle series of notes that sounded almost like laughter. Word of Katie's breakthrough spread through the station like wildfire. Researchers from dozens of species came to observe the impossible sight of a human and a void stalker engaging in what could only be called a musical conversation. Some were skeptical, others amazed, but none could deny what they were witnessing. Commander Velter arrived on the 10th day, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture that Katie had learned indicated deep thought among his species. "Explain to me how this is possible," he said, watching as Katie and the creature exchanged increasingly complex musical phrases. "I think we've been approaching this all wrong," Katie replied, not taking her eyes off her strange new friend. "We assumed it was a mindless predator because that's what we were told. But what if void stalkers aren't predators at all? What if there's something else entirely?" The creature seemed to sense they were talking about it. It made a series of urgent-sounding notes, then began touching specific points on the containment wall in a pattern Katie had seen before but never understood. This time, she paid attention to the sequence. The creature was creating a star map, using the glowing points on the wall to show the position of various stellar systems. And at the center of the map, it touched a point that Katie recognized from her navigation training. "That's the Kepler Nebula," she breathed. "The region where this specimen was captured." The creature made an affirming sound, then began a new sequence of touches. This time, the pattern showed ships, lots of them, converging on a single point. "It's trying to tell us something about its capture," Katie realized. "Something important." Commander Velter moved closer to the barrier, his black eyes fixed on the creature's star map. "What are you trying to say, he asked, speaking directly to the creature for the first time since its arrival. The creature's response was a song unlike any they had heard before, mournful, complex, filled with a grief so profound that several of the watching researchers stepped away from the containment area. Katie felt tears streaming down her face as the meaning became clear. "It's not a predator," she whispered. "It's a refugee." The implications of that revelation would change everything they thought they knew about one of the galaxy's most feared species. But first, Katie had to find a way to prove it, and to discover what terrible tragedy had driven this magnificent being so far from home. The truth unveiled. The emergency council meeting was unlike anything Nexus Station had ever witnessed. Representatives from 47 species crowded into the main conference chamber, their voices creating a cacophony of languages, clicks, whistles, and harmonics that threatened to overwhelm the universal translators. Katie stood at the center of it all, her small human form dwarfed by beings that towered over her, yet somehow commanding their attention through sheer force of conviction. "You're asking us to believe that centuries of established science are wrong," growled Administrator Thex, a massive creature covered in crystalline formations that chimed when he moved. "That one of the galaxy's most feared predators is actually, what? A lost tourist?" "Not a tourist," Katie replied firmly. "A survivor. Maybe the only survivor." She activated the holographic display, showing the star map that her friend, she had begun thinking of the creature that way, had created through their musical exchanges. The image rotated slowly, highlighting systems throughout the Kepler Nebula region. According to the creature's communications, its people were called the Kithra. They were explorers, scientists, artists. Their ships traveled between these systems. Katie pointed to the glowing points, establishing research stations and cultural exchanges with dozens of species. Commander Velter's 4 arms moved in the gesture Katie now recognized as deep skepticism. "And where are these peaceful explorers now, Lieutenant Morrison?" Katie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They're gone. All of them." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. "Gone." Research Director Kelvin's leaves rustled with confusion. "What do you mean, gone?" Katie took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to reveal would sound impossible. 3 months ago, long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures in the Kepler Nebula. The readings were consistent with planetary destruction, not natural disasters, but deliberate annihilation. She manipulated the hologram, showing the timeline of destruction. System after system, world after world, all showing the same pattern of devastation. Someone or something systematically destroyed every Kithra world, every research station, every outpost. The creature we've been holding, its name is Sharix, by the way, managed to escape in a damaged ship. It was trying to reach neutral space when our patrol ships found it. Escape from what? Security Chief Yulvin demanded, his clawed hand still resting on his weapon despite the multiple barriers separating them from any threat. Katie's hands trembled as she activated the final sequence of the holographic display. The image that appeared made several of the council members recoil in horror. Ships. Thousands of them, sleek and black, moving in perfect formation through space like a plague of metal locusts. At their center was something that defied easy description, a massive construct that seemed to bend space around itself, surrounded by smaller vessels that moved with predatory grace. "The Devourers," Katie said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "That's what Sharix calls them." They appeared in Kithra space without warning and began systematically exterminating everything they found. Not for resources, not for territory. They killed for the sake of killing. The silence in the chamber was deafening. "The energy signatures we detected," Commander Velter said slowly, "those were planets being destroyed." 17 worlds, Katie confirmed. Billions of lives. An entire civilization wiped out in a matter of weeks. Sharix watched its homeworld die from orbit before managing to escape. Administrator Thex's crystalline formations chimed discord. "How do you know all this?" "The creature could be lying, manipulating you." "Because it showed me," Katie replied. She activated her personal recording device, and the chamber filled with the hauntingly beautiful music that had become her constant companion over the past weeks. This isn't just communication. It's memory. SCI-F has been sharing its experiences, its losses, its pain. Every song tells part of the story. As the alien melody played, Katie provided translation, her voice breaking as she conveyed the creature's memories of watching its people die, of fleeing through the void with nowhere to go, of being captured by beings who saw it only as a monster to be studied and tormented. The attacks on the research teams, Katie continued when the recording ended, they weren't random violence. SCI-F was defending itself against what it thought were more devourers. The pain devices, the stun weapons, the attempts to drug it, they used similar techniques. Research Director Kelvin's leaves rustled softly. The creature, SCI-F, it thought we were its enemies. It still does, to some extent, Katie admitted. But it's beginning to understand that we're different. That maybe, for the first time since the destruction of its people, it's found someone who wants to help rather than hurt. Commander Velter stood and approached the holographic display, studying the formation of Devourer ships. Lieutenant Morrison, are you absolutely certain of this information? As certain as I can be, Katie replied. But there's more. SCI-F believes the Devourers are still out there, still spreading, still destroying. Its people tried to warn others, but no one believed them until it was too late. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. If Katie was right, if the creature's memories were accurate, then the galaxy faced a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. What does it want from us? Security Chief Yulvin asked, his aggressive posture somewhat diminished by the magnitude of the revelation. Katie smiled for the first time in weeks, though tears continued to stream down her face. The same thing any refugee wants. Safety. Understanding. A chance to warn others about what's coming. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of dozens of species. And maybe, if we're very lucky and very brave, it wants to help us figure out how to stop the Devourers before they find us. The debate that followed would last for hours, but Katie had accomplished something that no amount of scientific study had managed. She had given Specimen X7 a name, a history, and a voice. She had transformed a monster into a person. Now came the much harder task of convincing the galaxy to listen to what that person had to say. A new beginning. 6 months later, Katie stood in what had once been a containment cell and was now something entirely different. The energy barriers had been removed, the transparent walls replaced with open archways. Soft lighting cast gentle shadows on walls that were no longer bare metal but covered with intricate murals depicting scenes from Kithra history. SCI-F moved through the space with grace that still took Katie's breath away. The creature that had once been labeled the galaxy's deadliest predator now served as the primary consultant for the Galactic Defense Initiative, sharing its knowledge of the Devourer threat with military strategists from across known space. The morning songs are particularly beautiful today, Katie said, settling into her usual spot on the floor. SCI-F responded with a complex melody that Katie had learned to recognize as gratitude mixed with melancholy. Even after all these months, the loss of its people remained a constant ache in the alien's consciousness. The new translators are helping, Katie continued, gesturing to the advanced equipment that now allowed SCI-F to communicate directly with other species without relying solely on musical interpretation. Commander Velter says your tactical briefings have been invaluable. A series of harmonious notes conveyed SCI-F's satisfaction with this development. The creature had thrown itself into the task of preparing the galaxy's defenses, working tirelessly to share everything it knew about Devourer technology, tactics, and psychology. The irony wasn't lost on Katie. The being that everyone had feared as a monster had become their best hope for survival. There's something else, Katie said, pulling up a holographic display on her portable unit. The long-range scouts have found something. SCI-F went very still, its multiple eyes focusing intently on the data streaming across the projection. Katie watched as the alien absorbed the information, its body language shifting from curiosity to something that might have been hope. It's faint, Katie explained, but the signatures are consistent with Kithra technology. There might be others out there, Sharix. Other survivors. The song that erupted from Sharix was unlike anything Katie had heard before, pure joy mixed with desperate longing, a symphony of emotions that brought tears to her eyes. Other beings throughout the station reported feeling the music through the walls, a haunting melody that spoke of hope against impossible odds. When the song finally faded, Sharix moved to the star map it had created on the wall and began adding new points of light, showing Katie where the signals had been detected. 3 systems, Katie read from the display. All in the outer rim, all showing signs of hidden activity. If there are survivors. Sharix's response was immediate and determined. It wanted to go. Not just to find its people, but to warn them that the Devourers were still hunting, still spreading their destruction across the galaxy. Katie felt her heart breaking even as she understood the necessity. The Council will never approve a mission into potentially hostile space. Not with the Devourer threat still active. But even as she said it, Katie knew she was wrong. The past 6 months had changed everything, not just about how the galaxy viewed the Kithra, but about how they approached the unknown. Sharix had taught them that monsters were often just people who had never been given a chance to tell their story. Commander Velter arrived later that day, his 4 arms carrying data tablets and his expression grave. The Council has reached a decision, he announced without preamble. Katie felt her stomach clench with anxiety. And? We're forming an expedition, Velter said, his musical voice carrying notes of surprise. 3 ships, mixed crews, heading for the outer rim. If there are Kithra survivors, we need to find them. If there are Devourers. He paused, looking directly at Sharix. We need to know. Sharix's response was a cascade of musical notes that the new translators interpreted as overwhelming gratitude mixed with determination. The alien moved to Katie's side, one of its 6 hands gently touching her shoulder. It wants you to come, Velter said, though Katie had already understood. As the primary xenological liaison and the only being who has successfully established communication protocols with Kithra consciousness patterns. Katie looked up at Sharix, seeing herself reflected in those multiple eyes that had once seemed so alien and terrifying. Now they looked like home. When do we leave? She asked. 2 weeks later, the expedition ships departed Nexus Station with great ceremony. Representatives from all 47 member species came to see them off, understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment. The galaxy's first joint mission to contact a species they had previously considered extinct. Katie stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, watching the stars whirl past as they jumped to hyperspace. Beside her, Sharix sang softly, not the mournful songs of loss they had shared for so long, but something new. Something that sounded like hope. Do you really think we'll find them? Katie asked. Sharix's reply needed no translation. In any language, across any species barrier, some concepts were universal. Hope. Determination. The refusal to give up on the possibility that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, family was waiting to be found. As their ship raced toward the unknown, Katie reflected on how much had changed since that terrifying first day on Nexus Station. She had arrived as a rookie human, fresh out of the academy and certain she knew how the universe worked. She was returning to space as something else entirely, a bridge between species, a translator of songs, a living testament to the power of curiosity over fear. Behind them, Nexus Station continued its work, now with a new understanding of what it meant to study the dangerous unknown. Ahead of them lay mysteries that might reshape everything they thought they knew about life, intelligence, and the bonds that could form between the most unlikely of friends. Sharix's song grew stronger, joined by harmonies from the Kithra communication equipment they had brought along. If there were survivors out there, they would hear the call. They would know they were no longer alone. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, Katie Morrison, former rookie, current pioneer, smiled as she listened to her friend's song of hope echoing through the cosmos. The expedition would face dangers she couldn't imagine, encounter wonders beyond her comprehension, and possibly change the course of galactic history. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to know that she had helped transform fear into understanding, isolation into connection, and a monster into a friend. Sherix's melody soared higher, carrying with it the dreams of an entire species and the promise that no matter how dark the void became, there would always be someone listening, someone ready to answer the call. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, full of infinite possibilities. The end.